So I'm very excited to introduce our next guest. Major Vito Errico and Major Jason Zuniga serve as co-directors of the U.S. Army Futures Command Soldier-led software factory in Austin, Texas. Under their leadership, the U.S. Army is driving some really amazing outcomes in Kubernetes created by soldiers for soldiers. So please welcome Majors Vito Errico and Jason Zuniga.
Thank you so much, Amanda. It is an honor and a privilege not only to be a part of this, but to follow Craig. Not every day somebody like Craig opens for you. We've got a standard sort of overview of what we've been up to over the past year, in close collaboration with VMware and a series of other entities. And I just pick up where sort of Craig and Amanda left off, that it's all about outcomes for us. That's really what we're going after, and we'll kind of talk a little bit about why why this endeavor is worth it for us, and how we think we're going to get there. Without any further ado, let me start sharing some content and working through the fun of. As Amanda said already, my name is Vito. My co-director is Jason, and we run the Army Software Factory on behalf of General Murray and Command Sergeant Major Crosby, the command team that runs Army Futures Command. Let's roll right in. This is sort of how we got here, and it's sort of to demonstrate the fact that Army senior leadership at the highest levels has sort of directed this into existence. There was a lot of educating and a lot of back and forth on what this would eventually look like. But there's really three reasons as to why soldiers need to lead software in the future, or software development in the future. And a lot of it has to do with what Army Futures Command is all about. And for those of you who don't know anything about Army Futures Command or even the Army, which really briefly kind of talk about how the Army got used to doing business one way for about 20 years, as we had 150,000 people in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it gets very easy for a big organization in the federal government like the Army to get used to doing things over and over again. And it gets really hard for them to stop doing it that way. And so in this moment of self-awareness and clarity, the Army decided that it was going to conduct its most major reorganization in the last 40 years and stand up a 4-star headquarters inside in downtown Austin to sort of better appreciate changes in technology over that 20 years and to better prepare and forecast for some future operating environment. Not necessarily on a 2 or 3 year timeline, but on a 5, 10, even 15-year timeline. And that's extremely unique for the to the rest of the Army. Well, where me and Jason came in is part of our job was to look at preparing for and forecasting the future operating environment, what that really meant. And we had some operational experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we sort of recognized that a lot of the software development and the more complex IT work was largely outsourced to contractors in the TOCs and the flight lines and sort of those places in Iraq and Afghanistan that you wouldn't from the outside think weren't necessarily soldier-led. We said, well, if the Army is going to need to be able to fight maybe more technically advanced adversaries at some point in the future, we're probably going to need to grow this competency at the soldier level, not just be able to rely on contracting it out in a traditional vendor model. It's also likely that Army is going to fight on the battlefield of the future where it occurs in either a degraded or a fully disconnected environment. So the idea that where you'd be able to pick up the phone and call back for help, that's not necessarily something that we can treat as a given as warfare and the technology landscape changes over time. So that's where Software Factory was really born, this idea that, hey, can you create soldier pure autonomous product teams to operate at the edges of the battlefield without reliance on some higher help or some contracted support. The second reason that we're sort of here is because, as Jason and I set out to do a whole bunch of market research about this idea of investing in technology for legacy or for more traditional organizations, something that we noticed, this phenomenon in Fortune 500 America, where as the bar to entry got lower with the ubiquity of cloud technology, DevSecOps cybersecurity models became more in vogue. agile software development sort of became the standard, we noticed that companies that you would traditionally not think of as tech companies were no longer cost minimizing their IT costs, but rather investing in it as more of a value producing competency. And we thought about that a lot. And we said, well, hold on a second, maybe that's something that the Army can mimic, because soldiers know our problems the best, and our value proposition is our soldiers. And what if we enable and empower soldiers to solve their own problems with software, just kind of in line with what we just talked about? That was sort of a really interesting idea that we got from private industry. And then the last sort of idea of why we're going after this whole software factory initiative is sort of a corollary to the first two, and it's that in the Army or in the DoD, you can get really caught up in the more sexy weapon systems or communication suites, and you sort of forget about the idea of modernizing, which is the fundamental mission of Army Futures Command, is really about investing in people. And if you really want to be ready for whatever's going to come our way in the future, you've got to have a workforce that's technically proficient, and that's all of those three things sort of align together to kind of form the foundation of what we're doing with Software Factory and why we're here. And then finally, the last part of this memo is just sort of talks about that Army Futures Command is uniquely suited to do this on behalf of the Army. So just sort of an overview of how we got here. We talked a little bit about degraded and disconnected future battlefields. A big point that the Army is trying to drive home for future operating environment is this idea of decision dominance, speed and range to create overmatch. And that happens, as we all know, at lower levels. Can you empower down so that soldiers can solve problems for themselves rather than taking time to work things up the chain and back down the chain and everything that would potentially go into that loop, right? You're trying to eliminate that as much as possible. I think probably for this crowd, the idea of traditional software development in a federal sense, I'm not going to bemoan this point too much, but we get plenty of help from the Defense Innovation Board, the General Accounting Office, and National Defense Authorization Act language that talks about how traditional software procurement is just too slow, too expensive, and has too little value once it's ultimately fielded. And why isn't the federal government, not just the Army or DoD, why isn't the federal government able to better leverage modern DevSecOps principles, agile software development in a way that traditional tech companies, or Silicon Valley tech companies do? And a lot of that has to do with culture. And I don't think that's really a big breakthrough for anybody here on this line. We got a couple of charts up there that we sometimes talk through, but it's just this idea that technology is changing so fast, and that entities in the federal government, like the DoD, we're sort of beholden to more logarithmic progression when it comes time to how we contract, how we color money, how we manage our people, and that's the real problem that we're trying to solve here. Not just necessarily developing software or building product teams, but also highlighting a lot of the bureaucratic inertia or some of the policy impediments that are in place to the senior leaders that we work for, to help them to get them to remove that, so that the wider enterprise of the Army can best move ahead. Let's go ahead and talk about what software factories are. We joke about this one because, candidly, a lot of people in the Army, when this first happened, they said, well, what's this software factory idea? Did you invent it out of nowhere? Is this a figment of your and Jason's imagination? And the answer is no. And we show them this. We say it's a real thing, and here's what the Defense Innovation Board says it is. And software factory means a lot of things to a lot of different people. We fully acknowledge that. There's some nuance in the community. But at the end of the day, this presentation from a lot of the software factories around DoD would be heavily toolchain oriented. We would be talking about our choices for static and dynamic code analysis, container orchestrations, Kubernetes or not, and we would get really technical, and we can do that. But as we were running around DoD taking these briefs and seeing who was doing what, we noticed that the third and the top of that pyramid there on the slide was that element was glaringly missing. How do you build people into this idea of a software factory such that you're setting it up for enduring long-term value, and so that you can scale appropriately, and so that you can keep soldiers at the center of the idea rather than sort of piecemeal them in and out and focus on the technology? So for us, software factory is just as much about people as it is about technology. And I'm going to turn it over to Jason to kind of talk about the heart of what we're doing here in Austin.
Yeah, thank you, Vito. So we're at this really cool inflection point, and we're just really fortunate to be a part of it right now in the Army, because exactly to what Vito was saying, the Army is looking at modernizing not just in the technological sense, but that human capital sense and how we think about talent and people inside the Army. And so for how we kind of bring that forward, exactly to some of the points that Craig was making, right? It's collaborating with the right organizations and team members. It's trying to achieve those outcomes. And so for us, what we're trying to get after as our mission, just as we looked at the future force, future operating environment, is we're trying to prototype a future force design for what the Army is going to need and operate with as we think about kind of organic software developers and things that we can't even necessarily pinpoint right now to say that 10 and 15 years down the road, if we don't start those muscle movements now, we're never going to get there, is an extremely important part of this. But we're really aligning it with these 3 LOEs that you can see there, right? And it's increasing the digital proficiency across the force, right? And we start with the individuals that have some of that talent. We kind of incubate it and we kind of deliver it back to the Army in a well thought out manner so that they can employ those product teams in a way that works well at both the tactical to the strategic level, and it kind of raises that competency as a whole across the force. Solving current Army problems, we're talking about that throughout, right? The outcomes that we're trying to achieve by using those agile DevSecOps practices and leveraging cloud technologies is an extremely important part of this. And starting from go with that, I think is super beneficial for us. But it's how do we kind of scale that out and kind of democratize it for the Army? And then the last part there is how do we harness the innovative spirit of the country, right? We're extremely fortunate to start our journey in Austin, where Army Futures Command is, right? And so there's an incredible amount of kind of collaboration and input to the tech ecosystem here, and being able to work in that environment is extremely important for us. And so we think that that's really going to kind of continue to spread across both the Army and the country for us to be able to really continue to build upon what we've started in Austin. And that's what it's about. It's about creating a repeatable, scalable capability on the organic side. And we know that for the Army, we haven't done a soldier-led software factory before. And so we're not going to try and convince the world that we can just start that from scratch. So that's why it takes, it takes a village to kind of get us over or to get that first software factory started for us. But we're extremely happy with where we're at and where we're going. We've got kind of the quick rundown on how we see this coming to fruition in our pipeline is we look at this as a wicked problem for the Army, because change is already difficult. Just making technological decisions is already difficult as it is. But then to put that in a large bureaucratic organization like the Army, it becomes even more difficult. The wicked problem is it's not just a technological decision. It's archaic cybersecurity policies. It's human capital talent management. How do you have the authority to put people on specific roles and jobs in the force that's not already designed that way? And one of the unique things that we found was a lot of senior leaders in the Army thought that we had to kind of go outside the Army to find that talent and lower the barriers of entry in order to get talented individuals in the Army that would be able to, work as product managers, as user designers, as application engineers or platform engineers. And so we kind of just took that journey to go out and start making soldier touch points. And, with 500,000 people in the active force alone, almost, we were able to find a pretty decent amount of skill hidden out in the Army. And so how do we kind of then take that in? We built a blinded board process so that we can take in soldiers, civilians, and when we say soldiers, everything, including officers, warrant officers, and enlisted. It's rank and grade and MOS agnostic. So it doesn't matter kind of like what your role in the Army is right now. If you've got the right skill set, if you've got the aptitude and the attitude to do this, using industry best practices, then we want to have you on our team. And so for us, it's leveraging some unique kind of constructs to be able to try and bring all those individuals into the software factory, and then incubate that talent in what we're calling like a tech accelerator or a boot camp. And then we're pairing them up with SMEs, right? Obviously from the kind of tech industry field, and currently that's being provided by the VMware team, and they're helping us really, just like we would at a rifle range, shoulder to shoulder, continue practicing and working on our skill sets there. We're taking the rifle out of their hands and we're putting keyboards in their hands and continuing to enable them and upskill that talent. The long-term plan or success of this will kind of help shape the Army and where we think we can go with organic software development teams. And so that's really what we're trying to do is demonstrate in an iterative fashion and provide that feedback so that we can continue to, one, learn as an organization and continue to grow, but also provide that feedback mechanism to the Army so we can continue to move in the right direction with both technology and human capital talent management. And then we'll go ahead and I'll turn it back over to Vito.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I would just say that there's some really fun stories associated with and empirical evidence associated with this particular idea. We talked about that idea of like pulling from existing talent from inside the Army that was maybe underutilized or maybe not satisfied with its roles because of again, it goes back into how is a traditional organization valuing modern tech talent. And so we've got like these great buckets of people where talent was just sort of coding in their spare time, or that military recruiters sort of convinced people to go in different directions than maybe could have been better utilized, or people we got right and assessed them into technical branches, but then because of an outdated procurement practice, we're still working on hardware that's 20 years old, or people that we trained up ourselves and we did really, really well, we being the big Army, but because of quality of life concerns, they just wanted to get out at the first opportunity and we were going to lose them. So this pipeline that we're showing you here, our first cohort, and we'll talk a little bit about the cohorts, I think at the end, 45% of the first cohort was going to get out of the Army at the first opportunity. And this software factory opportunity, basically the idea of empowering soldiers to build software for other soldiers as part of product teams, has served as a great retention tool. And so that's that idea is something that's becoming even more powerful inside the Army than the actual software factory idea. And I think you're going to see that particular idea scale out even more in the future. I think we talked about the idea of what the Army says is prototyping a future force design. And what that really is just a fancy way of saying, hey, how would a software product team like work with a traditional Army unit if you were to set it up in perpetuity, if it was supposed to be a uniform presence on the battlefield? That's ultimately what we're doing at Software Factory. Yes, we're building software. Yes, we're practicing DevSecOps. Yes, we're developing in the cloud. But at the end of the day, it's about how are the soldiers going to be able to be empowered and go build software at various echelons outside, home station. And here's our sort of like going in position or assumption, for lack of a better word, of what we think the teams will look like. And shouldn't be too many surprises here, right? It's the idea of you do it as a tech company would do it. You'd have a product manager, you'd have a designer, you'd have several application developers. This was pretty countercultural when we first pitched it to Army leadership, because in the Army, probably like a lot of other like tech organizations, there is a sense that like I can just train up a software developer for 5 or 6 months and then send them out and about and they're going to go solve all the world's software problems. That's obviously like wildly incorrect, and sort of demonstrates the need to do something like this so that we can better inform senior leaders of the gravity and scale of some of these technology decisions. The other cool thing about this was we received direct feedback from a lot of stakeholders, specifically on Capitol Hill, that said, hey, we like the team idea. The balanced team idea is something that will take hold in your organization because the Army fights as a team, whether it be some kind of small unit. But it also means that this level of technical competency that's relatively new won't get lost in a wave of a more traditional part of the organization, rather than if you send somebody alone or as a 2-person team, they can kind of get just stuck in the corner or get told, hey, we've got this other non-technical or job for you that's not going to maximize your skill set. So this is what we think. This is going to be something that we prove out. We've got the latitude to sort of build it out, maybe make some changes. And we also like the idea for the product team of bolting on a data science or a data integration team with a data engineer and a data scientist, sort of as the problem set evolves or dictates. And then, of course, there'll be platform team in there too. And what we're working on with that is how that plays out. And I think some of the people here listening today probably know we've got a pretty close relationship with the office of the CIO at the headquarters department of the Army and the Pentagon, and the ECMA, the Enterprise Cloud Management Agency. This idea that a centralized function for the Army that is not only bringing on an infrastructure solution, but a DevSecOps solution. So we're hand in hand with them on this. And what we kind of talk about is how that platform team in turn empowers us to focus on software development. Because at the end of the day, we want to be focused on those outcomes that Craig talked about. We don't necessarily want to be worried about plumbing all the time, and being able to, for lack of a better word, abstract that away really suits our specific needs of focusing on software solutions. We talked about the idea of basically market research as we were conceptualizing the software factory, but we were also doing a pilot on the side. Jason, do you want to talk a little bit about that pilot and how it helped inform what the software factory is doing?
Sure. I think, just kind of touching on based on this really quickly, as Vito said, this was really how we kind of, as we took that iterative approach doing market research, how do we inform kind of like the decisions in the pathway that we were thinking about standing this up for the Army? And so that pilot specifically, kind of new and nascent, like what the Army kind of knew or thought about software development and organic software development, started with the idea of teaming up with the Army's Materiel Command, which is like a logistics focused organization within the Army. And we said, very loosely scoped problem, which is, prime for kind of like this process is, hey, how do you kind of like get after some of the issues that we're having with ordering systems and like fraud, waste, and abuse, if you had to put a name to it or something, because we're having lots of problems with kind of like how our logistics ordering chain is at the tactical level. And so we have these supply support activities, which are basically just kind of like order fulfillment center warehouses at the end of the logistics train, if you will. And we worked with them, and we went up to nearby Fort Hood and just kind of studied the problem a little bit, watching soldiers, interacting with them, studying how they were actually kind of conducting their work and their business. And it was an extremely manual process. And so as we kind of like mapped out there for you, you can see that, the idea of potential other software systems in the Army, not necessarily designed using agile methodologies, or you're created in a DevSecOps way using traditional kind of waterfall development, weren't really answering all the problems and helping soldiers in the way that allowed them to maximize the use of technology. And so they were having to do a lot of ordering, or a lot of printing of orders, a lot of manual sorting, optimizing, and prioritizing all manually before they conduct their grocery store shop around the warehouse. And all the warehouses look the same, and all the kind of like bins and buckets are designed the same so that it should be easy. But because technology wasn't quite fully setting them up for success, what we did is without having the access to the data or the kind of IP of that system, we took the output of that system and we kind of created a glueware solution that took that output, reprioritized and optimized it, so that now as you're taking that list, you just drop it into this other simple web application that now spits out your revised shopping list, and you can just go right off the bat. You don't have to take all the time to manually dedicate 3 soldiers every shift to, however long it takes. And obviously the more lists in your shopping, or the more items in your shopping list, the worse off you are. And so even at some of the larger scale depots that feed our rotational training units, it became that much more important for those organizations to have this type of technology in their hands. And you can see some of the results there as we learned as we went how to kind of operate in the cloud environment. We're saving a ton of soldier hours every day just by enabling this small or simple web application and putting it into the hands of soldiers across the entire Army. We started really small and kind of like built it with that iterative fashion, getting user feedback quickly and build it out. And then, really in a difference from what the Army usually sees, where something is created and then pushed from the top down to say everybody's going to use this. This is the new product of record, et cetera. We did it from the bottom up, and we even in a COVID environment, we're able to work remotely and get with other units, spreading the usage of this application to Fort Carson, to JBLM and other organizations across the Army, so that, obviously that user adoption being the key driver to kind of be an indicator of success for us. And so that was a really great project for us as we were informing the larger model that we were trying to structure for the Army. Oh. Thank you.
Yeah, so with that sort of like as a background, not just the pilot project, but also the overall software factory idea, we're sort of catching a lot of headlines lately, and I think the one that we're most proud of, in addition, well, actually the chairman cutting our ribbon was really humbling, but is that one in the middle there where even the media is picking up this idea that we're trying to be, as an Army, less dependent on contractors for software development. And so this idea of abstracting away, or at least sort of like keeping the platform as focused on development as possible, that helps us reduce the burden of contractors in the middle of the stack. And that's where the Army really needs to focus, given some of the footprint challenges it's going to have in the future, and how we want to make sure that we keep focus on soldier outcomes. Now, just to tie up here shortly, here's what's going on at the software factory now. We were awarded a $5 million grant from Governor Abbott because of the potential for the effect on the local ecosystem. For some of you who don't know, we're co-located at the Austin Community College, 5 minutes away from Google and Facebook and the UT Macomb School of Business, and 5 minutes from AFC headquarters. So a great location that's also hosting its own IT accelerator, and just couldn't ask for a better partnership. A lot of reasons, a lot of synergies there. And we talked about the cohorts before. So cohort 1 is on the ground. They've been completing their tech accelerator since January, and cohort 2 will be on the ground here shortly in late June, and then cohort 3 will be on the ground in January. And so what we've set up is sort of every 6 months, just like software cycles, right? Like we learn, we get better, we implement feedback, and we try it again, right? So every 6 months, that's sort of a little microcosm for agile software development. And then we didn't talk too much about the technical stuff here today because we wanted to provide more of an overview of our project. But we're in multi-cloud production with both AWS and Azure, a lot of thanks to the relationships with the ECMA and the CIO's office, as well as what we prototyped out of the gate here at AFC headquarters, and just building this idea of a DevSecOps playbook so that others around the organization, whether they're here on the ground floor or they're going to be, be involved with their own digital transformations, can sort of ride on some of the lessons learned that we're already forging. I think that's a big part of what everybody's trying to do in the federal workspace, with respect to cybersecurity and changing the way we do software development. And then lastly, we've got quite a few workloads at this point. There's always that push-pull in the federal space of hey, give you enough room to grow, but at the same time, hey, let's get moving on workloads. And so we're at that fun point, and we've got a lot of workloads, and our product teams are actually starting their first projects this week. So very fun time to come to Austin. And then the last slide here is something that we as Futures Command sort of always try to drive home to the people that we have the privilege of briefing, and it's this idea of the future. And for those of you who are less familiar with the way that the Army ranks work, basically the kids in first and second grade will be the lieutenants and the privates on the battlefield 10 years from now. And we don't know what those battlefields will look like. We don't know if we'll be at war or not. But we know we want to make sure that those kids are as prepared as possible, and that we do the work that we can now in advance. And that gets back to what Jason was talking about. If we can build the institutional muscle movement in now, so that they're as best possibly enabled as they can be, I think we've done our part. And so that's what this is all about. And that's all we have for you today. We're really, really just privileged to be a part of this. And I'll turn it back over to Amanda. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thank you, Vito. Wow, that is just some truly inspirational stuff happening at U.S. Army Futures Command. But before you guys head out, I got a couple questions for you. So you talked a lot about talent, right? And creating the right culture is so important for empowering that talent and retaining that talent. What are some decisions that you guys made early on to impact the culture of the software factory?
I'll take that one first. And I think we recognized that this was going to be a lot about culture change and very, very early on. So I think, first of all, what we said is, hey, this can't happen on a normal military base. This is going to have to happen in a place like Austin. It's going to have to happen in a not traditional military setting, because if you're going to take lower ranking people and you're going to sit them next to higher ranking people, both sides are going to be afraid to ask questions, and everybody's going to be really timid. So that was big, right? So we're first names, it's civilian clothes. So when people come and visit, they're like, where are the soldiers? And like, no, soldiers wear civilian clothes too. And then another thing that we decided early on was to bring in, in this case, VMware, to bring in our vendor partner pretty early once we were under contract, because we recognize the Army can't teach itself how to be a Silicon Valley tech company, right? We need outside help for that, right? It would be like Silicon Valley saying, hey, we want to learn how to operate tanks. They'll come to the Army. Well, in this case, we're coming to you guys. And so bringing the culture that already existed from a place like VMware was really important, because it is fundamentally different than the Army operates. And that's okay, right? We're trying to take the best practices of both and better use it for our organization's outcomes.
Thank you. Okay, I got one more. So we all love outcomes, and we love outcomes with soldiers even more. So can you explain a little bit how you guys are thinking about outcomes and what this, means for soldiers in the short term?
Pending Jason's thoughts, I'll just say, we got kind of like two kinds of outcomes. Number one, right, like we said, we're building software products. Make no mistake about that. And those software products have outcomes to the Army in the shape of cost savings, readiness increases, mission effectiveness increases. That's sort of just the intermediate step to what we talked about at the beginning, and the idea of we're building autonomous product teams of soldiers that can operate on their own in an agile sort of way without an additional vendor presence. That's the outcome, that the longer term outcome that we're really, really specifically interested in. Jason, I don't know, what do you think?
No, I totally agree. It's a combination of all sorts of things. We want to improve the lives of soldiers and improve the capabilities of our senior leaders in the Army. And I think you can talk to any of our cohort members, and all of them are taking part in this journey with us because they want to make the Army a better place for all those team members that they might have just been with, or whoever else it might be to come. And so, improving their lives, making them feel like they have technology that is, of the last, maybe decade or whatever, might be a little bit better than some of the archaic capabilities that we have. But getting at all of the modernization priorities of the Army, of the Department of Defense, tech talent, and all of that is, this is absolutely one of the points of focus right now. And we're just absolutely privileged to be able to be here to talk about it with everybody.
Well, thank you guys so much. Thank you to the U.S. Army, especially thank you to you guys, Vito and Jason. Thanks for sharing your journey with us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity, Amanda.
Thank you, Amanda. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.